They fired me at 8:29 a.m., exactly 31 minutes before the biggest presentation of my career. The $72 million European investor was already in the building, expecting me to lead the meeting I'd spent 9 months preparing for. By noon, that same investor was sitting across from me in my new office, not to scold me for the morning's disaster, but to sign a contract. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about real value and the price companies pay when they completely misjudge the people who create it. My name is Elena Wyatt, and at 36, I thought I understood how corporate America worked. I was wrong about a lot of things that Tuesday morning in March, but I was absolutely right about one. I knew exactly what Orion Techs was worth, and I knew exactly how to get them their $72 million. The alarm went off at 5:47 a.m. in my downtown Austin apartment. Same as every day for the past 9 months. Coffee first, then the ritual review of my presentation materials spread across the dining table like battle plans. Charts showing Orion Tech's renewable energy projections through 2030. Financial models I'd built from scratch. Risk assessments that kept me awake some nights. Not because they were wrong, but because they were so precisely right. Delphi Crest Partners occupied 3 floors of a glass tower on Congress Avenue, the kind of mid-tier consulting firm that punched above its weight by landing clients who couldn't quite afford McKinsey but needed more than local talent. I'd been their strategic lead for high-value energy deals since joining 2 years ago, back when the company actually valued competence over politics. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt different that morning. Maybe it was the way Jeremy from accounting avoided eye contact, or how Sarah from HR was suddenly very interested in her phone screen. In a company of 43 people, you notice when the social temperature drops. My office overlooked the construction site where they were building Austin's newest tech campus. 9 months ago, when Orion Techs first walked through our doors, I'd watched those workers laying foundation while I built the strategic framework that would transform a regional solar installation company into a major player worthy of European investment capital. Novarel Capital had found us through their Austin connections, a French investment group with very specific requirements for ESG compliance and long-term sustainability metrics. They didn't just want to throw money at American renewable energy. They wanted to understand the regulatory landscape, the political risks, the competitive advantages that would make Orion Techs a viable 20-year partnership. I spoke their language. Literally, my French was good enough for technical discussions, and my background in international environmental policy meant I understood exactly what they needed to hear. More importantly, I understood what they needed to see in the numbers. The conference room was already set up when I arrived at 7:15. Presentation loaded, handouts organized, backup materials ready, in case they wanted to dive deeper into any section. Everything perfect. Exactly as I'd learned to prepare for meetings that could determine whether a client lived or died. Orion Tech's CEO, Marcus Webb, arrived early too. We'd worked closely enough over 9 months that he trusted my judgment completely. "You ready to make us rich?" "Elena," he asked, adjusting his tie with nervous energy. "I'm ready to show them why you're worth $72 million, I replied, meaning every word. That's when Greg Thorne appeared in the doorway. 6 months as our new managing director, brought in from a larger firm to scale our operations and strengthen client relationships. Greg had the kind of polished confidence that impressed boardrooms and intimidated junior staff. But I'd noticed he rarely contributed substance to strategic discussions. "Elena, could I see you in conference room B for a moment? Just a quick pre-meeting alignment?" The walk down the hall felt longer than usual. Conference room B was where we held disciplinary meetings and difficult conversations, not strategic alignments. Greg closed the door behind us with the careful precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "I'm going to cut straight to the point," he said, settling into a chair across from me. "We've decided to make a change in today's presentation leadership." The words hit like cold water. "What kind of change?" The client feedback has been that they'd prefer a more senior voice leading the discussion, someone with broader executive presence. Brent Mallory will be handling the presentation this morning. Brent Mallory, 6 weeks at the company, sales background, not strategy. Hired because he'd managed a few energy sector accounts at his previous firm, though none remotely close to this scale or complexity. Greg, I've been building this relationship for 9 months. I know every detail of their requirements, every concern they've raised, every metric they're tracking. Brent doesn't even... Elena, I understand your attachment to this project, but business is business. Sometimes we need to think about optics and what works best for everyone involved. Optics. The word hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire I was just beginning to smell. They specifically requested that I lead today's session, I said carefully. Novarel's team has been working with me directly on the technical specifications. Greg's smile was the kind perfected in MBA programs and client dinners. I'm sure they'll appreciate Brent's approach. Fresh perspective. You know, we'd like you to stay in the room. Of course, provide support as needed. Think of it as strategic backup. Strategic backup. 9 months of 18-hour days. Weekends spent modeling scenarios. Late-night calls with French investors who trusted my expertise. And I was being repositioned as strategic backup. My phone buzzed. A message from Claude Rousseau, Novarel's lead partner. Looking forward to your presentation this morning. The board is very excited to hear your final recommendations. I looked up at Greg, who was checking his own phone with the distracted air of someone who considered this conversation finished. What time should I plan to support Brent? I asked. Meeting starts at 9. I'd suggest you arrive by 8:45 to brief him on any last-minute details he might need. 8:45. 15 minutes to transfer 9 months of institutional knowledge to someone who probably couldn't pronounce photovoltaic correctly. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and gave Greg the kind of professional smile I'd perfected for clients who were about to make terrible decisions. Of course, I said. I'll make sure Brent has everything he needs. It was 8:29 a.m. when I walked out of Conference Room B, officially demoted from lead strategist to strategic backup in the most important deal of my career. I had exactly 31 minutes to figure out what the hell I was going to do about it. The next 20 minutes moved like a fever dream. I found Brent in the main conference room, frantically clicking through my presentation slides with the desperate energy of someone cramming for an exam they'd forgotten about. Elena, thank God you're here, he said without looking up. Greg said you'd walk me through the key points. I pulled up a chair next to him, watching as he scrolled past 9 months of carefully crafted analysis. The presentation I'd built wasn't just slides, it was a story. It started with Orion Tech's current market position, walked through the competitive landscape, identified 3 critical risk factors that could derail European investment, and concluded with a roadmap that addressed every concern Novarel had raised in our preliminary meetings. Okay, so the main thing is we're asking for $72 million, right? Brent said, stopping on slide 15. Novarel is offering $72 million, I corrected. But they have very specific requirements about regulatory compliance and long-term sustainability metrics. See this section here. I pointed to slides 23 through 28, where I'd outlined the ESG framework that European investors demanded. Environmental, social, and governance standards weren't just buzzwords to Novarel. They were legal requirements that could make or break the deal. Right. ESG stuff. Got it. Brent made a note on his phone. Anything else I should know? Anything else? 9 months of relationship building, 3 trips to Orion Tech's facilities, countless hours modeling financial scenarios, and he wanted to know if there was anything else. Brent, Claude Rousseau speaks perfect English, but he prefers technical discussions in French. If he switches languages, he's testing your depth of knowledge. Also, their compliance officer, Marie Dubois, will ask about Section 1603 Treasury grant eligibility. That's covered in the appendix. But, Elena, Brent closed my laptop and looked at me directly for the first time. I appreciate the help. I really do. But I've been doing energy deals for 12 years. I think I can handle a presentation. 12 years. I checked his LinkedIn profile the day Greg hired him. 12 years selling solar panel installations to suburban homeowners and small businesses. The biggest deal on his resume was $2.3 million. Of course, I said. You'll do great. At 8:50, I watched the Novarel team arrive through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows. Claude Rousseau, tall and precise in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Marie Dubois, pulling a leather briefcase that undoubtedly contained the due diligence materials they'd been reviewing for weeks. Behind them, two junior analysts whose names I'd learned during our preparatory calls. They knew me. We'd spent hours together on video conferences, walking through technical specifications and regulatory requirements. Claude had complimented my understanding of French renewable energy policy. Marie had asked me to review their preliminary compliance framework because she trusted my expertise. Now they were about to sit down with Brent Mallory, who thought ESG stood for really good stuff, and probably couldn't find Section 1603 in the tax code if his life depended on it. I positioned myself in the back corner of the conference room, laptop open, playing the role Greg had assigned me strategic backup. Marcus Webb from Orion Techs sat at the head of the table, looking nervous but confident. He caught my eye and nodded. He still thought I was running this show. The presentation began exactly as I'd planned it, with Brent reading from my slides about Orion Techs' market opportunity. For the first 10 minutes, everything seemed fine. The slides spoke for themselves, and Brent had enough sales experience to project confidence. Then Claude asked his first question. Could you elaborate on the long-term capacity scaling assumptions in your financial model? Specifically, how you've accounted for grid interconnection bottlenecks in the Texas market. Brent paused, clicked to the next slide, paused again. Well, as you can see here, we're projecting significant growth across all sectors, he said, gesturing vaguely at a chart showing revenue projections. Yes, but the interconnection queue with ERCOT currently has a 2-year backlog, Claude continued. How does Orion Techs plan to navigate that constraint? I had answers to this question, detailed answers, backed by conversations with ERCOT officials and alternative interconnection strategies we developed specifically for this scenario. The information was in slide 34, but Brent was staring at slide 12. That's a great question, Brent said. Marcus, do you want to speak to the operational aspects? Marcus looked confused. We'd rehearsed this presentation 3 times. I was supposed to be handling the technical questions while he focused on vision and leadership. Marie Dubois leaned forward. I'm curious about your Section 1603 Treasury grant analysis. The IRA modifications have created some interesting opportunities for renewable projects of this scale. Section 1603. I'd spent 2 weeks modeling different grant scenarios and their impact on Novarel's investment timeline. The analysis was comprehensive, innovative, and tucked away in an appendix that Brent had probably never opened. Absolutely, Brent said with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from having no idea what you're talking about. We're very excited about all the Treasury opportunities available. Claude and Marie exchanged a look. It was subtle, but I'd spent enough time with them to recognize the moment when European politeness starts wearing thin. Perhaps we could review the specific compliance framework you've developed, Claude asked. We've been working on this with your team for several months. Your team? He was looking directly at me when he said it. Brent followed his gaze, then looked back at Claude. Elena has been deeply involved in the compliance work. Elena, do you want to walk them through that section? The room went quiet. Greg, who'd been sitting silently near the door, cleared his throat. Actually, I think it would be better if we kept the presentation focused on senior leadership perspectives, Greg said. Brent, perhaps you could highlight the key compliance points. But Brent was already lost. He'd clicked forward to a slide about market penetration rates, which had nothing to do with compliance frameworks and everything to do with his panic at being asked technical questions he couldn't answer. Marie's expression shifted from polite attention to something approaching concern. I'm sorry, but could we take a brief break? I think there may be some confusion about which materials we're reviewing today. In the silence that followed, my phone buzzed with a text message. Claude had somehow found my number. Is there somewhere we could speak privately after this meeting? I think we need to clarify a few things about the project scope. I looked up to find Claude watching me, his expression carefully neutral, but his meaning clear. Novarel hadn't come to Austin to waste time on sales presentations from someone who couldn't answer basic technical questions. They'd come to finalize a deal with the person who'd been building their confidence for 9 months. That person was sitting in the back corner, officially designated as strategic backup, watching $72 million walk toward the door. The break stretched into an awkward 15 minutes. I watched Claude and Marie step onto the balcony, their conversation animated but too quiet to overhear through the glass. Marcus paced near the coffee station, shooting increasingly worried glances between Brent and the door. Greg had disappeared, probably to take a call he suddenly remembered was urgent. I slipped out of the conference room and walked back to my office, my mind racing through possibilities I'd never seriously considered before today. My laptop was still open to the presentation files, but I minimized them and opened a browser window I'd bookmarked months ago but never actually used. Wyatt Strategies, LLC. I'd registered it 6 months ago during a particularly frustrating week when Greg first joined the company and started making noises about optimizing our human capital allocation. At the time, it felt like buying insurance I'd never need a safety net that would probably expire unused. The registration was still active, business license current. Even the basic website template I'd thrown together was still live, though it looked exactly like what it was, a placeholder created by someone who never expected to use it. I opened a new document and started typing. Effective immediately. I am resigning from my position as Senior Strategic Consultant at Delphi Crest Partners. My final day of employment is today, March 15th, 2024. I will be transitioning to independent consulting through my own firm, Wyatt Strategies, LLC, where I can better serve clients who value deep expertise and long-term strategic thinking. All materials related to my work at Delphi Crest will be returned according to company policy. However, I retain ownership of all analytical frameworks, industry research, and academic publications developed prior to or independently of my employment here. That last paragraph was crucial. The Orion Tech's financial model was built on frameworks I developed during my graduate work at UT's Energy Policy Program. The ESG compliance analysis drew heavily from my published research on European renewable energy regulations. Novarel had specifically requested my involvement based on papers I'd written before Delphi Crest even knew my name. Greg could replace me in the presentation, but he couldn't transfer 9 months of relationship building or years of specialized knowledge to Brent Mallory in a 15-minute briefing. My phone buzzed with a text from Claude. The meeting seems to have lost focus. Would it be possible to speak with you directly about next steps? I typed back quickly. I'll be available after the current session ends. I may have some alternative approaches to discuss. Alternative approaches. That was diplomatic enough to avoid burning bridges while opening the door to exactly the conversation I needed to have. I saved the resignation letter to my personal drive, then began the delicate process of identifying which files belonged to me and which belonged to Delphi Crest. The original Orion Tech's assessment I'd written was based on public filings and my own industry analysis. The financial models used templates I'd created during my doctoral work. The regulatory framework drew from research I'd published in the Journal of Renewable Energy Policy 2 years before joining the company. Novarel hadn't hired Delphi Crest Partners. They'd hired Elena Wyatt, who happened to work at Delphi Crest Partners. There was a difference, and Greg's morning ambush had just clarified exactly what that difference was worth. I opened another browser tab and pulled up the LLC banking account I'd set up but never used. Zero balance. But everything was properly configured for business transactions. I'd even ordered business cards as a joke, 500 cream-colored cards with simple black text that I'd never handed to anyone. The cards were in my desk drawer, underneath a stack of industry reports, and next to the bottle of Advil I'd been reaching for more frequently since Greg's arrival. I pulled one out and examined it like an artifact from someone else's life. Elena Wyatt, Principal Consultant, Wyatt Strategies, LLC. Strategic Advisory for Energy and Infrastructure. 6 months ago, it felt presumptuous. Today, it felt like the most honest description of what I actually did for a living. Through my office window, I could see the Novarel team still on the balcony. Claude was checking his phone while Marie pointed towards something in the distance, probably the construction site where Austin's renewable energy future was literally being built. They hadn't come to Texas to waste time on presentations that answered none of their questions. I opened a new email and began composing a message that would either save the deal or end my career in corporate consulting. Claude and Marie, thank you for your patience during this morning's presentation. I understand there may have been some confusion about the technical materials and strategic framework you've been reviewing. I want to ensure that your investment decision is based on the most accurate and comprehensive analysis possible. If it would be helpful, I'm available to discuss the OrionTex opportunity in more detail this afternoon, including the specific compliance and regulatory frameworks we've developed over the past 9 months. I believe there are aspects of this deal that warrant deeper conversation, particularly around the ESG requirements and long-term sustainability metrics that are crucial to Novarel's investment thesis. Please let me know if you'd like to schedule a separate discussion. Best regards, Elena Wyatt, Principal, Wyatt Strategies. I read it 3 times before hitting send. It was professional enough to avoid accusations of client poaching, direct enough to signal that I understood their frustration, and strategic enough to position myself as the solution to the problem Greg had created. The response came back in less than 2 minutes. Elena. Yes, we would very much like to continue our discussion. Are you available at 1 p.m.? We can meet at our temporary office at the Four Seasons. The morning session raised several concerns about project continuity and strategic oversight. We'd appreciate your perspective on how to move forward. Claude Rousseau, Managing Partner, Novarel Capital. I looked at the clock, 11:47 a.m., just enough time to clean out my desk, submit my resignation, and prepare for the most important lunch meeting of my life. I hit reply and typed a single line, "I'll see you at 1 p.m. Then I opened my desk drawer, pulled out one of those business cards I'd never used, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. It was time to find out what Elena Wyatt was actually worth. I didn't go back to the conference room. Instead, I positioned myself in the break area where I could see through the glass walls, but remain invisible to the presentation disaster unfolding inside. What I witnessed over the next 45 minutes was a masterclass in how to destroy 9 months of relationship building in real time. Brent had returned from the break with renewed confidence, apparently believing that projecting authority could substitute for actual knowledge. He'd rearranged my slides into what he probably thought was a more sales-focused sequence, leading with revenue projections instead of the technical foundation that made those projections credible. As you can see, we're looking at exponential growth across all market segments, Brent announced, clicking to a slide showing OrionTex's 5-year revenue forecast. It was slide 42 in my original presentation, designed to come after 30 minutes of supporting analysis that justified every number on the chart. Claude raised his hand politely. I'm sorry, but could we step back to the capacity assumptions underlying these projections, specifically, how OrionTex plans to scale their installation workforce to meet these targets? It was a softball question. I'd spent weeks modeling workforce scaling scenarios with OrionTex's operations team. The answer involved a partnership with Austin Community College's renewable energy program, a detailed training timeline, and projected labor costs that were built into every financial model. Brent stared at the slide for a long moment. That's a great operational question. Marcus, you want to take that one? Marcus looked genuinely confused. We'd rehearsed this 3 times. He was supposed to handle vision and leadership. I was supposed to handle technical details and strategic analysis. Now he was being asked to improvise answers to questions that required months of preparation. Well, we're definitely committed to scaling our workforce, Marcus said carefully. We've got some exciting partnerships in development. Marie leaned forward. Could you be more specific? Our investment timeline assumes certain operational milestones that depend on having qualified technicians in place. Through the glass, I watched Marcus glance toward the back of the room where I was supposed to be sitting. When he didn't find me there, panic flickered across his face. Elena has been working closely on the workforce development strategy, Marcus said. She could probably give you more detailed timelines. But I wasn't in the room, and Brent was suddenly faced with explaining a strategy he'd never seen. The workforce development is definitely a priority, Brent said with the kind of vague enthusiasm that fills dead air, but answers no questions. We're looking at multiple approaches to ensure we have the right people in place. Claude and Marie exchanged another look. This time, it wasn't subtle. Perhaps we could review the regulatory compliance framework, Claude asked, his tone remaining diplomatic, but with an edge of frustration. We've been working on this for several months. Several months with me. Specifically, the compliance framework wasn't just a section of the presentation, it was a living document that Claude and I had refined through dozens of email exchanges and 3 video conferences. He knew exactly how thorough the analysis was, because he'd helped shape it. Brent clicked forward to slide 67, which showed a generic chart about regulatory considerations. It was the kind of slide you include when you need to acknowledge that regulations exist, but don't actually understand what they require. As you can see, we've done extensive analysis of the regulatory landscape, Brent said, reading directly from the slide text. OrionTex is well positioned to navigate the complex requirements in this space. Specifically, how does the Infrastructure Reduction Act impact your Section 1603 Treasury grant eligibility? Marie asked. And what's your timeline for IRS certification? Section 1603. Again, I'd built an entire appendix around Treasury grant optimization because Marie had specifically requested it during our February call. The analysis included 3 different scenarios depending on project timing, detailed cash flow implications, and a risk assessment that identified potential delays in the IRS certification process. Brent clicked through several slides, clearly looking for something that mentioned Treasury grants. He found a bullet point that said, "Maximize available tax incentives," and highlighted it with his cursor. "We're definitely planning to take advantage of all available incentives," he said. "The Treasury grant program offers significant opportunities for projects like this." "But what about the certification timeline?" Marie pressed. "Our investment schedule depends on understanding when those funds will actually be available." Brent paused, clicked to another slide, paused again. "That's something we're working closely with our advisors to optimize." The silence that followed was devastating. I could see Claude checking his phone, Marie reviewing her notes with the kind of focused attention that meant she was preparing to ask harder questions, and the 2 junior analysts looking increasingly uncomfortable. Marcus tried to salvage the situation. "Maybe we should take another break and regroup on some of these technical details." "Actually," Claude said, closing his portfolio with deliberate precision, "I think we may need to reconsider the structure of this discussion entirely." He stood up, and Marie followed. The junior analysts began packing their materials with the efficient movements of people who'd participated in enough failed meetings to recognize when it was time to leave. "We came here expecting to finalize our investment framework based on the strategic analysis we've been reviewing for months," Claude continued. "Instead, we're discussing high-level concepts that don't address any of our specific requirements." Greg, who'd been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke up. "I'm sure we can address any technical questions you have. Our team has deep expertise across all aspects of this project." "Your team," Marie said, emphasizing the words, "appears to be missing the person who actually developed that expertise." Through the glass, I watched 24 people realize simultaneously that the deal they'd spent 9 months building was falling apart in real time. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. Brent was still clicking through slides, apparently hoping to find something that would explain how Treasury grants actually worked. Greg's face had shifted from polished confidence to barely controlled panic. "Perhaps," Claude said, gathering his materials, "we should continue this conversation when everyone who needs to be involved is actually available to participate." He looked directly at the empty chair where I was supposed to be sitting, then back at Greg with the kind of diplomatic courtesy that Europeans use to deliver devastating criticism. "We'll be in Austin until tomorrow evening," Claude continued. "I suggest you use that time to determine who exactly is prepared to discuss the technical and strategic elements of this investment." With that, the Novarel team walked out of the conference room, leaving behind a $72 million deal that had just collapsed under the weight of corporate politics and strategic incompetence. I checked my phone, 12:23 p.m., 37 minutes until my lunch meeting with the people who just walked away from Delphi Crest Partners forever. It was time to find out if they were walking towards something else entirely. The Four Seasons downtown Austin occupied prime real estate on San Jacinto, close enough to the Capitol that you could see politicians and lobbyists mixing with tech executives and oil money in the marble-floored lobby. I arrived at 12:55, 5 minutes early, but not early enough to seem desperate. Claude and Marie had claimed a corner table in the restaurant's private dining area, away from the lunch crowd of deal-makers and influence peddlers who made Austin's power lunch scene feel like a smaller, friendlier version of Manhattan. They'd ordered coffee but no food, which told me this was a business meeting disguised as a social meal. "Elena," Claude stood as I approached, extending his hand with the kind of genuine warmth that had been missing from the morning's disaster. "Thank you for making time on such short notice." "Thank you for the invitation," I replied, settling into the chair across from them. I imagine this morning raised some concerns about project continuity. Marie laughed, not politely, but with real humor. "That's a diplomatic way to describe what we just experienced. May I ask what happened? We've been working with you directly for months, and suddenly you're not in the room when we need to discuss the technical framework you developed." I had prepared several different versions of this conversation, ranging from diplomatic deflection to complete transparency. Looking at their faces, frustrated but not hostile, confused but still engaged, I chose honesty. I was removed from the presentation this morning. New management decided that a more senior voice would be better suited for the final meeting. Claude frowned. "More senior than the person who's been leading the strategic analysis, the person we specifically requested. Apparently, optics matter more than expertise in some organizations." Marie pulled out her phone and showed me an email thread. "We sent 3 messages over the past week confirming that you would be presenting the final framework. No one told us there had been changes." I read the messages quickly. All 3 were addressed to me personally, with copies to Greg and Marcus. Greg had responded to each one with variations of, "Elena and the team are looking forward to the meeting," never mentioning that Elena wouldn't actually be leading anything. "This is interesting," I said carefully. "It suggests there may have been some communication gaps within our organization." "Communication gaps," Claude repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" The waiter appeared, offering menus we all declined. This wasn't about food. "Elena," Marie said, leaning forward, "let me be direct. Novarel invested significant time and resources developing this relationship because we believe in the Orion Tech's opportunity, and we trust your analysis. This morning's presentation didn't just fail to answer our questions, it raised fundamental concerns about whether Delphi Crest understands what we need." "What do you need?" I asked. "We need someone who can speak intelligently about regulatory frameworks, someone who understands European ESG requirements, someone who's done the deep work on financial modeling and risk assessment. We need the person who's been doing this work for 9 months." Claude nodded. "The presentation we saw this morning could have been delivered by any junior consultant with a PowerPoint template. We came to Austin for strategic expertise, not sales theater." I felt the moment shifting, the conversation moving from diagnosis to possibility. What if I told you that expertise is still available, just not necessarily through the same organizational structure? Marie raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" I reached into my jacket pocket and placed one of those business cards on the table between us. The cream-colored paper looked almost absurdly simple against the white tablecloth, but the text was clear enough. "As of this morning, I'm operating as an independent consultant. Wyatt Strategies LLC specializes in strategic advisory for energy and infrastructure projects." Claude picked up the card, examined it, then looked back at me. "This morning. About 2 hours ago. Actually, I submitted my resignation letter right after your meeting ended." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. I could hear the ambient noise of the restaurant conversations at other tables, the soft clink of silverware, someone's phone buzzing, but our corner felt suspended in its own quiet bubble. "That's quite a coincidence," Marie said finally. "Is it?" I asked. "You came to Austin to work with someone who understands your investment requirements and can deliver the strategic analysis you need. That person is sitting right here. The only thing that's changed is the letterhead." Claude was still studying the business card. "And you have access to all the work product we've been reviewing." "I have access to everything I developed, which includes the regulatory framework, the ESG compliance analysis, and the financial models that form the foundation of your investment thesis. Those frameworks were built on research I conducted independently, using methodologies I developed during my academic work." "What about Orion Techs?" Marie asked. Marcus Webb seemed genuinely surprised by this morning's changes. "Marcus is a good CEO who trusted his consulting firm to manage the presentation properly. He had no idea Greg was planning to replace me until it happened. I suspect he's having a very difficult conversation with Delphi Crest right about now." My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it quickly, Marcus, asking where I was and whether I could help clean up this mess. I set the phone face down on the table. Claude leaned back in his chair, considering. "Let's say, hypothetically, that Novarel wanted to continue this discussion with you directly. What would that look like?" "Hypothetically," I replied, "it would look like a strategic advisory engagement between Wyatt Strategies and Orion Techs, with Novarel as the investment partner, all the same analysis, all the same expertise, but with clearer lines of communication and accountability. And you could deliver the technical framework we need for our investment committee." "I can deliver exactly the framework you need, because it's the same framework I've been building with you for 9 months. The only difference is that now you'd be working directly with the person who created it, instead of through intermediaries who don't understand it." Marie and Claude exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation I wasn't privy to. Then Claude smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since arriving in Austin. "Elena, would you be available for a working session this afternoon? We have some specific questions about the regulatory timeline and the ESG compliance structure." "I'm available now," I said. "I brought my laptop." "Perfect. Marie, do you think the business center upstairs would work for a technical review?" "Absolutely." As we gathered our things, Marie turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "One more question. What happens to Delphi Crest in this scenario?" I thought about Greg's smug confidence this morning, about Brent clicking through slides he didn't understand, about 9 months of work being reduced to strategic backup. Delphi Crest gets to explain to Orion Techs why their $72 million deal just walked out the door, I said, and then they get to explain it to their other clients. Claude laughed, a sound I hadn't heard all day. "I think we're going to work very well together." As we headed toward the elevators, I felt my phone buzzing again. Greg this time, probably wondering where his strategic backup had disappeared to. I let it go to voicemail. I had real work to do. The Four Seasons Business Center occupied a quiet corner of the 3rd floor, equipped with conference tables, high-speed internet, and the kind of soundproofing that made million-dollar deals possible. By 2:30 p.m., we'd transformed the space into a war room, with my laptop connected to a large monitor displaying the regulatory framework that Novarel actually needed to see. "This is what we were expecting this morning," Marie said, reviewing the ESG compliance timeline I'd pulled up. "Detailed analysis, specific deadlines, actual understanding of European requirements." I walked them through the regulatory pathway step by step, switching between English and French as we dove into technical details about EU taxonomy requirements and sustainability disclosure standards. Claude asked probing questions about implementation timelines. Marie tested my understanding of cross-border compliance issues. It felt like a graduate-level seminar taught by experts who actually wanted to learn. The Section 1603 Treasury Grant certification should come through within 90 days of project initiation, I explained, highlighting the relevant section of my analysis. But there's a backup scenario if IRS processing delays push that timeline out. "Show me the backup scenario," Claude said. I clicked to a spreadsheet that modeled 3 different funding sequences. If Treasury grant certification is delayed, Orion Techs can access bridge financing through their existing credit facility while maintaining the project timeline. The net impact on IRR is minimal, maybe 20 basis points, but it eliminates execution risk. Marie nodded approvingly. This is exactly the kind of contingency planning we need. How did this not come up in this morning's presentation? Because the person giving this morning's presentation didn't know it existed, I said simply. We spent the next hour diving into technical details that would have made Brent Mallory's head spin. Grid interconnection strategies, workforce scaling models, competitive landscape analysis, regulatory risk assessment. Every question they asked, I had an answer backed by data I'd spent months developing. At 3:45, Claude closed his laptop and looked at Marie. I think we've seen enough. I felt my stomach tighten. Either they were satisfied or they were done wasting time. Elena, Marie said, we'd like to propose a formal engagement between Novarel Capital and Wyatt Strategies to serve as lead strategic advisor for the Orion Techs investment. The words hit me like cold water in the best possible way. The scope would include finalizing the regulatory framework, overseeing ESG compliance implementation, and providing ongoing strategic support throughout the investment period, Claude continued. We're talking about a multi-year advisory relationship, not just transaction support. I managed to keep my voice steady. What kind of timeline are you considering? We'd like to finalize terms this week and announce the advisory engagement alongside our investment commitment, Marie said, assuming Orion Techs is amenable to working with you directly instead of through Delphi Crest. My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout our meeting. I'd ignored it, but now I glanced at the screen. 7 missed calls from Marcus, 4 from Greg, and a text message from Marcus that simply said, "Call me immediately." I think Orion Techs will be very amenable, I said. In fact, I suspect they're having some concerns about their current advisory relationship right about now. Claude smiled. Why don't you give Marcus a call? We'll wait. I stepped into the hallway and dialed Marcus's number. He picked up before the first ring finished. Elena, where the hell are you? His voice was tight with stress. That presentation was a complete disaster. Novarel walked out. Greg is in full panic mode, and Brent is trying to convince me that everything went fine. I'm at the Four Seasons with Claude and Marie, I said. We've been working through the technical framework for the past 2 hours. Silence. Then, you're with them now. Marcus, I need to tell you something. I resigned from Delphi Crest this morning, but I'm prepared to continue supporting the Orion Techs deal through my own consulting firm. Another silence. Longer this time. Your own firm. Wyatt Strategies. Claude and Marie want to engage me directly as lead strategic advisor for the investment. The question is whether you're comfortable working with me outside the Delphi Crest structure. Are you kidding me? Marcus laughed, but it sounded more like relief than humor. Elena, you've been carrying this deal for 9 months. I don't care what letterhead you're using as long as you can get Novarel back to the table. They're not just back to the table, I said. They're ready to move forward, but it has to be with me directly, not through Delphi Crest. Done. Whatever you need. Just, please tell me we can salvage this thing. I walked back into the conference room where Claude and Marie were reviewing something on Claude's phone. They looked up expectantly. Orion Techs would be delighted to work with Wyatt Strategies as their strategic advisor, I announced. Excellent, Claude said. Marie, do you want to draft the engagement letter? Over the next 30 minutes, we outlined terms that made my head spin. A substantial retainer for strategic advisory services, success fees tied to investment milestones, a multi-year consulting agreement that would establish Wyatt Strategies as a legitimate player in the renewable energy space. We'll need this formalized by Friday, Marie said, reviewing the notes she'd taken. Our investment committee meets Monday morning in Paris, and we want to present the complete package investment thesis, strategic advisor, implementation timeline. Friday works, I said, though I was already mentally calculating everything I'd need to accomplish in 3 days. Office space, proper business banking, insurance, legal review of the engagement letter. Claude stood and extended his hand. Welcome to the Orion Tech's investment team. Elena, I think this is going to be a much more productive relationship than what we experienced this morning. As they gathered their materials, Marie paused. One more thing. We'll be announcing this engagement publicly alongside our investment commitment. Are you prepared for that level of visibility? I thought about Greg's reaction when he realized that his strategic backup had just walked away with a $72 million deal, about Brent trying to explain to future clients why his biggest presentation had ended with the investors hiring someone else, about Delphi Crest Partners trying to rebuild relationships that had taken years to develop. "I'm ready," I said. After they left, I sat alone in the business center for a few minutes, staring at my laptop screen. The regulatory framework that had caused so much confusion this morning was still open, every detail exactly where it belonged. Nothing had changed about the work, only about who was doing it and who was getting credit for it. My phone buzzed with a text from Claude. "Engagement letter will be ready for review tomorrow morning. Looking forward to a successful partnership." I gathered my things and headed for the elevator, already planning my next steps: office space, business setup, client onboarding procedures, all the infrastructure of running an actual consulting firm. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, I realized I was smiling. Not because I'd gotten revenge on Greg or proved a point about my value. I was smiling because for the first time in 9 months, I'd spent an afternoon doing exactly the work I was hired to do, with people who understood exactly why it mattered. The elevator doors opened onto the marble lobby where deals were made and careers were built. I walked through it like I belonged there. Because now, I actually did. Thursday morning's Austin Business Journal led with a headline that made my coffee taste better. "European investment giant drops local consulting firm. Hires independent advisor for $72 million deal." The article was short but devastating, mentioning Delphi Crest Partners by name and describing Tuesday's presentation as a fundamental disconnect between client expectations and consulting expertise. My phone had been ringing since 6 a.m., 3 calls from reporters wanting quotes about the consulting industry, 2 from former colleagues asking if the rumors were true, and 1 from Sarah in HR asking me to return my company laptop. Apparently they'd finally realized I'd resigned. The most interesting call came from Jennifer Walsh, a senior strategist I'd worked with on 2 previous deals. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Elena, I just read the journal article. Is it true that Novarel hired you directly?" "It's true. And you're operating as an independent firm now." "Wyatt Strategies, yes." A pause. "Are you hiring?" By noon, I'd received similar calls from 3 other Delphi Crest consultants, all strategists, all people who'd watched Tuesday's disaster and drawn the obvious conclusions about where the company was headed under Greg's leadership. Jennifer was particularly interesting. She had relationships with 2 mid-size infrastructure clients who'd been growing increasingly frustrated with Delphi Crest's new direction. Those clients signed contracts with the company because they wanted to work with specific people, Jennifer explained over lunch at a cafe near the Capitol. When those people get sidelined or replaced, the clients start looking elsewhere. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I'm thinking that if Wyatt Strategies were looking for a senior associate with existing client relationships, we might have a conversation worth having." I spent the afternoon in temporary office space I'd rented by the hour, working through the logistics of scaling a consulting firm from zero to viable in less than a week. Jennifer's clients represented another $40 million in potential project value. Combined with the Orion Tech's engagement, I was looking at enough revenue to support a real company, not just a one-person show. The official announcement came Friday morning. Novarel Capital issued a press release that was diplomatically worded but unmistakably clear. Novarel Capital is pleased to announce its strategic investment in Orion Techs Corporation, with Wyatt Strategies LLC serving as lead strategic advisor for the engagement. Greg called within an hour of the announcement going public. "Elena, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he began, his voice carrying the kind of forced calm that comes from practicing difficult conversations in front of a mirror. "What kind of misunderstanding?" "About Tuesday's presentation. I was trying to give you development opportunities by having you work alongside senior leadership. I never intended for you to feel sidelined. Development opportunities. 9 months of relationship building reduced to a learning experience for my own benefit. Greg, I appreciate the call, but I'm not sure what we have to discuss. Novarel found the strategic expertise they needed. Orion Tex is moving forward with their investment, and everyone seems satisfied with the current arrangement. Look, I'll be direct. Delphi Crest is prepared to offer you a significant promotion and equity stake if you'll consider returning. We could structure this as a partnership track position with your own client portfolio. I looked out the window of my temporary office space, watching construction workers build Austin's renewable energy future one steel beam at a time. That's generous, Greg, but I'm not interested in returning. Elena, think about this practically. You're trying to build a consulting firm from scratch in one of the most competitive markets in the country. We're offering you an established platform, existing infrastructure, built-in support systems, and existing management that removes me from presentations 30 minutes before they start. Silence on the other end of the line. This doesn't have to be adversarial, Greg said finally. We could explore a subcontracting relationship. Delphi Crest could refer overflow work to Wyatt Strategies. Overflow work. The scraps from deals I used to lead. I don't think that's going to work for us, I said, but I appreciate the offer. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet office space, processing the conversation. 6 months ago, a partnership track offer from Delphi Crest would have been exactly what I wanted. Financial security, established reputation, access to big deals and important clients. Now it felt like an offer to return to a smaller version of myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Claude. Saw the press coverage. Congratulations on the successful launch. Looking forward to our kickoff meeting Monday. Then another text from Marcus. Orion Tech's board approved the Wyatt Strategies engagement unanimously, ready to build something amazing. And finally, a message from Jennifer. Decision made. When do I start? I opened my laptop and began drafting a response to the lease agreement for permanent office space in the building where I'd been working temporarily. 1,500 square feet, enough for a team of 5, with conference rooms and the kind of infrastructure that could support real client work. The lease was for 3 years, renewable. I read through the terms twice, then signed it electronically and sent it back to the property manager. Outside my window, those construction workers were still building Austin's future, one piece at a time. It seemed like the right day to start building something of my own. By 5 p.m., I had a signed lease, a new employee, and 3 potential clients who'd heard about Tuesday's presentation disaster and wanted to discuss alternatives to their current consulting relationships. Not bad for a Thursday. 3 weeks later, I stood in my new office on the 22nd floor of Austin's newest downtown tower. Watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the city, I was learning to see differently. The construction site that had been my view from Delphi Crest was now just one project among many, Austin building itself into something bigger, one decision at a time. The Wyatt Strategies nameplate on my door still felt surreal, but the work inside felt exactly right. Jennifer had officially joined as senior associate 2 days after I signed the lease. The Orion Tech's engagement was progressing ahead of schedule, with Novarel's investment committee having approved the full $72 million without a single revision to our strategic framework. My phone rang at 8:30 a.m. Claude calling from Paris with updates from the board meeting. The investment is final, he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Unanimous approval, with specific commendations for the quality of strategic analysis and regulatory framework. The board wants to know if Wyatt Strategies would be interested in reviewing 2 additional opportunities in our renewable energy portfolio. We'd be very interested, I replied, making notes on the legal pad where I'd started tracking our pipeline. 2 more Novarel deals would establish us as a legitimate player in European investment advisory work. Excellent. I'll have Marie send you the preliminary materials this afternoon. After we hung up, I walked to the conference room where Jennifer was preparing for our 10 a.m. meeting with representatives from Meridian Energy, one of the clients who'd reached out after reading about Tuesday's presentation disaster. They were looking for strategic advice on a wind farm development project that their current consulting firm, Delphi Crest Partners, had been struggling to advance for 8 months. "Ready for this?" Jennifer asked, reviewing the materials we'd prepared. "Ready," I said, meaning it completely. The Meridian meeting went exactly as I'd hoped. Their development director, Patricia Morrison, was direct about her frustrations with Delphi Crest's approach to the project. "We hired them because of their reputation, but we've been working with junior staff who don't understand the technical requirements," she explained. "When we ask for senior expertise, we get presentations that miss the point entirely." Jennifer and I walked them through our approach to complex infrastructure projects, focusing on the kind of detailed technical analysis that had impressed Novarel. By the end of the hour, Patricia was nodding enthusiastically. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," she said. "How quickly could you take over the strategic advisory role?" "We could start next week," I replied. After they left, Jennifer and I sat in the conference room, looking at our project pipeline, Orion Techs, 2 additional Novarel opportunities, Meridian Energy, and 3 other prospects who'd requested preliminary discussions. "You know what's funny?" Jennifer said. "6 months ago, I thought success meant making partner at a big firm. Now I'm realizing that maybe success means building something that actually works." I knew exactly what she meant. Success at Delphi Crest had been defined by internal politics, billable hours, and fitting into structures designed by other people. Success at Wyatt Strategies was defined by solving problems that mattered, building relationships based on competence, and creating value that clients actually recognized. My computer chimed with an email notification. The sender was Greg Thorne. "Elena, I wanted to reach out with some unfortunate news. Delphi Crest has lost 3 major clients in the past 2 weeks, all citing concerns about strategic expertise and project leadership. Brent Mallory was let go yesterday. I'm not reaching out to ask you to return. I understand that ship has sailed, but I wanted you to know that I've learned a lot from what happened in March. I made a serious error in judgment, and the company is paying the price for my mistake. I hope Wyatt Strategies continues to thrive. You deserve every bit of success you're achieving. Best regards." I read the email twice, then deleted it, not out of anger, but because it belonged to a version of my professional life that no longer existed. Greg's apology couldn't change what had happened, but more importantly, I no longer needed it to change. At 6 p.m., I was the last person in the office, finishing up notes from the Meridian meeting when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Webb. "Orion Tech's board wants to discuss expanding our engagement to include 2 additional renewable projects. Are you available for dinner tomorrow to talk about it?" I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at Austin's skyline, lit up against the evening sky. Somewhere in that grid of lights, Greg was probably working late trying to salvage client relationships that had taken years to build. Brent was updating his resume and practicing explanations for why his biggest presentation had ended with the client hiring someone else. I wasn't thinking about them with satisfaction or revenge. I was thinking about them with the kind of distant professionalism you feel toward competitors who've made strategic errors you're too busy to capitalize on. My success wasn't about their failure. It was about finally doing work that matched my capabilities, with people who understood exactly what they were paying for. I gathered my things, turned off the lights, and headed for the elevator. Tomorrow would bring new client calls, new strategic challenges, new opportunities to build something that worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. The elevator doors closed, and I watched the floor numbers count down toward the lobby where deals were made and careers were built. But for the first time in my professional life, I wasn't heading down to that lobby to prove myself to anyone else. I was heading home, knowing that I'd already proven everything I needed to prove to the only person whose opinion actually mattered, myself. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate revenge and professional redemption. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story? Are you dealing with your own workplace challenges or building something new? Please subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's connect with others who understand that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person you were always meant to be.